Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Well, welcome everyone to this virtual meeting of members of Kensington and Chelsea's Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the committee, and I'm joined this evening, as usual, by fellow committee members. We are joined on the line by Councillor Walla Idris and by Councillor Charles O'Connor. The two other members of the committee, Councillor Tom Bennett and Councillor Mo Bakhtiar, I think may well be able to join us shortly, but as I will explain, I think it's completely fine that we actually start the meeting now. We're also joined this evening by planning officers, including Amanda Reid, who is the Director of Planning and Place. If during the evening any planning officers need to speak, then I'll introduce them and explain who they are. Now, it's very important as we get underway to explain that this evening's meeting is a members' briefing about two major developments, Wornington Green and the Marks and Spencer Kings Road site, which are likely to come forward as planning applications within the next few months. I need to stress that we are not making any decisions this evening. The purpose this evening is for the owners of these sites to outline with their advisors their current proposals and for us to question, seek clarification, make comments on what we hear. In a moment or two, we're going to start with Wornington Green, and the format will be as follows, and the same will apply to M&S in Kings Road when we get to it. First of all, Catalyst, the owner, and their advisors will present their latest proposals. Then members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask questions. I'll then invite the local councillors. Now this is in Wornington Green, this is Goulburn Wood, so it's Councillor Pat Mason, Councillor Emma Dent Code and Councillor Sina Lari, if they would like to ask questions. And then, assuming we've got a bit of time left, members of the public and representative resident associations will be able to ask questions as well. We will need to finish about 7:25 because we'll have to have a short break before we move on to M&S. If I can ask everybody finally, if you aren't speaking, please be on mute and put your video off. And if you'd like to speak, can we this evening use the hands up Teams function if you want to request to speak. So if we can do it like that. Okay, well, thank you very much. So in that case, can I ask the various representatives for Wornington Green, perhaps it would be helpful if you can just quickly introduce yourselves and then go into your presentation, and if that can go on, we've got 10-15 minutes easily, and then there'll be questions as I've mentioned. So please go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and members. My name is Gillian Nix. I'm a planning consultant at CBRE, and we're advising Catalyst on this scheme. If I hand over to Catalyst, starting with Polly.
Good evening, I'm Polly Gardner. I'm Head of Special Projects at Catalyst, responsible for the Phase 3 planning application.
Good evening, I'm Chris Struthers. I'm the Planning Manager at Catalyst Housing, and I'm overseeing the planning application for the last phase of Wornington Green. And I'll pass you on to my colleague, Sarah, who I believe is on the call.
Good evening, I'm Sarah McMillan, also from Catalyst, who has a project manager role for Phase 3. And I will pass on to Conran and Partners, our architects.
Good evening, Chair and members. I'm Victoria Wenray from Conran and Partners, partner at Conran and Partners, and I'll be part of the presentation this evening. And I'll pass you on to my colleague, Nick Edler.
Hello, I'm Nick Edler, an architect and associate at Conran and Partners. Good to be here this evening, and I'll pass you on to, I think, is Olivia on the call?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Olivia Russell. I'm a planner at CBRE. supporting on phase 3.
So, Chair and members, I believe that's all of us from the applicant team this evening. We very much welcome the opportunity to present the proposals related to the final phase of Wornington Green this evening. We have a brief presentation which will take you through the scheme. And as you're aware, there are the wide members of the applicant team here this evening to answer any questions that you and the members of the public may have. So without further ado, I would invite Polly, if you would like to start to introduce the presentation.
Thank you, Gillian. So just to give a bit of context, we just wanted to remind you of who Catalyst are, if you don't know us already. We're a housing association. We own and manage over 34,000 homes in London and the South East, and our roots are in Kensington and Ealing. So we own over 2,300 homes in Kensington and Chelsea, most of which are in North Kensington, and 90% of these are for social rent. We're experienced in placemaking and developing tenure-blind communities, and our approach to development is very much underpinned by our long-term commitments to our neighbourhoods. And we work very closely with Catalyst Communities, our community investment arm, who work closely with the Venture Centre and other local initiatives to support the local community. So phase 3 is the final phase of our Portobello Square Wornington Green redevelopment. It generates a unique opportunity to reinstate the historic street pattern, not only generating greater connectivity, but also extending the iconic Portobello Road. Our vision for the phase, as it says at the centre of that diagram there, is very much to preserve and enhance a genuine sense of neighbourhood. And we very much want this phase to be vibrant and welcoming, supporting the rich, diverse and thriving community that already exists, but that will be extended with new residents as well as visitors. And the brief is very much for a variety of public and local spaces, and for the building character and design to reinforce a sense of legibility for locals and visitors, forming a backdrop to the new spaces and new easy to navigate routes. And I'll hand over to Victoria from Conrans, who will go through the plans in more detail.
Thank you, Polly. So a quick location scene setting slide. The site's north of the borough. It's a pivotal location between Ladbroke Grove, Portobello Road and Wornington Road. And the existing estate, which was built in the 1960s, actually severed this quite critical connection. And there's a photograph on the bottom right-hand side there of the existing estate. And whilst it's fair to say that there are some key issues and challenges with the built environment, there is a very strong existing community. This is part of 3 phases. The first phase has been delivered and now fully occupied. That's in the pink in the southern element. The second phase in the middle is in the process of being developed, delivered with block 4 now occupied. And the third and final phase at the northern quarter is what we're here to talk about today. The site's been identified as an opportunity for redevelopment. So it was recognised in the Wornington SPD that there was an opportunity for development, and it's subsequently been identified in the local plan, just to give a little bit of planning context. And this is a regeneration project that represents a serious commitment from Catalyst. It started in 2003. There was a Mori survey at this point where residents voted in favour of the regeneration, and this timeline just demonstrates that they have been involved throughout to the present day in 2020, and you'll see that a lot's happened in that time, and fast forwarding you can still see that there's a little way to go. So in terms of the master plan, it was very important to reinstate the historic street pattern, and the acquisition of the Friendship Centre, which is between Ladbroke Grove and Portobello Road, actually created an opportunity for us to evolve the master plan. to create greater public realm, so there's a genuine threshold to Portobello Road, greater pedestrian connectivity, and a more central location for the community centre within the wider community. And as part of that, it was important to create a dynamic mix of uses, and we've consulted on this both with the local stakeholders and residents, but also with specialists. It was important to create the retail continuity along Portobello Road. So you can see this nice mix of colours. Here's the purples, the retail, the community, which we touched on in the orange, and also providing residential amenity. And this is, importantly, this is equitable amenity for all residents that Catalyst is creating. And from first principles, sustainability has been considered. Naturally, taking into account GLA guidance, working with latest technology, for example, the air source heat pumps, creating greater energy efficiency in homes, lower bills for people, but also really developing on the ideas of healthy urban living principles. And that's not just about energy performance, it's about greener walkable neighbourhoods, pocket spaces for residents, a greater biodiversity. And the community centre is at the heart of this. We wanted to create a building and a centre that had great visibility. It's got a prominent position on Ladbroke Grove, but also on Portobello, facing onto the new public square, just to make sure that it speaks to a number of communities, and it very much follows the principles of the Venture Centre. We've got a lovely quote here from the director, Will Roberts, that he is supportive of the proposed location on Ladbroke Grove and Portobello Road. This is an important opportunity to link both communities. And again, just with the community centre, whilst there are specific requirements set out in the development framework, we've worked closely with the Venture Centre to establish a concise and bespoke brief, all particular to their requirements. And the result is a personalised solution. For example, a foyer with an internal street, if you like, which creates a clear connection between Portobello Road and Ladbroke Grove, and therefore the adjacent communities, and also transferring and improving the much-loved Adventure Playground. Recreating traditional streets is also an important part of the project. So image on the left-hand side, you see two photographs, one of actually historic Wornington Road with the bay frontages, and also typical terrace typology in the vicinity, Lansdowne Crescent. And what we wanted to create was a new spine to Wornington Road, this traditional street, and it's centred on the idea of terraced housing, which is traditionally a part of the streetscape, generating the ideas of bays, which also help to have a rhythm and movement down the street. And with that, creating a layer of intimacy, consideration on how people engage with the building and the streetscape, and with this a sense of materiality. And we've set up some views. This is looking along Wornington Road towards the apex with Portobello and Ladbroke Grove. The bayed spine to the right acts as a strong unifying element, and there's a softness at the top where it helps break down the bulk and the mass, and it meets the sky. And as we move along the street, new views are revealed, for example, looking left to the new Murchison Gardens, and finally coming up to the new public square, looking south along Portobello Road. And here you can start to see the green shared amenity that acts as a threshold. It's very much a gateway to the reinstated Portobello Road. And there's a glimpse here of shared pedestrian and vehicle surface, which allows for one-off events such as farmers markets. Another new piece of public realm is within the courtyard building. It's a further extension of attractive, usable space open to all. And then just returning back to Portobello Road, you can see on the right-hand side, phase 2 just peeping into the foreground, helps to join the dots, this retail continuity at the ground floor. And also a glimpse of the activity generated by the mix of uses, all facilitated by the landscaping and the shared surface. And there's a final block as well, which is still in sketch stage, but we wanted to show this to you to let you know that still quite a bit of design development to go. And this is going to have a distinct role at the head of Portobello Road. And naturally, we've worked hard with the council and our own consultants to design a combination of streetscapes that work together. So the traditional streetscape to the north with a shared surface, think about things like parking standards, and how we can encourage healthier, active streets and activating the commercial edge. So the Portobello Road we see very much as being a shared surface that then links back to Ladbroke Grove and the wider community. And throughout, we've engaged with the local community, as mentioned in our timeline earlier on. There's been a variety of methods. There've been very public events, for example, parties in the park, a stall at Goulburn Festival, and more focus groups, for example, resident steering groups and door knocking. And all of this has been brought together by a variety of mediums, such as emails, newsletters, flyers, social media. So really with a approach of targeting conversation with as many people as possible. And of course, with that, we have sought and received feedback on a whole host of issues, and actually continuing our success on the work that we did in phase 2 and garnering as much feedback as possible. And it's impossible to actually identify all of it, but throughout the design development, excuse me, we've carefully considered the community's wishes and responses to our conversations with them, and incorporating where possible, but always communicating throughout. Examples include, for example, how the public realm works. There was a desire to continue the use of pale materials, which the residents have really enjoyed from the earlier phases, which we've embraced. There's a whole host of things. And as mentioned, this is very much a regeneration project with over 500 existing households. And at the start of the journey, Catalyst made a series of commitments, which is called the Residents' Charter, or the 10 Commandments, and sets out the offer and services and support that the residents will receive. And examples include, for example, a guarantee to remain for those who wish to, building homes to similar space standards. And the following below, sorry, I'm speeding a little bit so we can get to the questions, so I hope you're following. The following is a summary of the housing provision. So in total, the phase 3 will create 371 quality new homes. 58% of that will be affordable, and will be providing 14 new homes above the outline consent. There are a number of wider planning benefits created by the scheme. We have some set out in the following pages, and those highlighted in the bright pink are a direct consequence of the changes that we have made since the outline consent. So there's a whole host of social benefits. Part of that is actually the delivery of 67 additional homes over that which would be accommodated by the consented outline parameter plans, and a delivery of an additional 3,500 square metres of affordable space over and above what's within the existing estate. So very much creating new quality homes. There's a greater economic benefit. There's an opportunity by the extension of the market and with the shared public space to create a more active dynamic space, and a whole host of environmental benefits as well. That includes, for example, the new public square, creating the access onto Ladbroke Grove. Importantly, we think the wider permeability and access and inclusion of the wider community, and also being able to redevelop a site that's adjacent to the phase 3 and bring that back into creating something new and viable there. And that concludes the presentation, I think, just within the time frame. So thank you very much, everybody.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed for that.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you like to stop sharing? What's the best thing for you?
I would just leave it like that, because
Okay.
It may well be that my colleagues and others, we have questions and might want to go back and forth across those slides. So I would just leave it up. Colleagues, who would like to go first in terms of asking any questions? Actually, Tom, and then Charles. So, Councillor Bennett. Tom, you go first.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. Thanks very much, Victoria. That was a very interesting presentation. One of the comments I noticed that you put up on screen from the consultation you did referred to the 15-storey building, which I assume is the one in front of us here on the slide, and asked, I think the comment, I can't remember word for word, but said, you know, it must be distinctive, it should look, I suppose the point is there's a high onus on it, being a much taller building, to be sort of more beautiful, more attractive and distinctive for the surrounding area, because it's going to be seen from so many views. And I was just wondering how you've responded to that comment, and how you've incorporated that thinking in designing that element of the scheme.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Yes, we've discussed this quite a lot with the residents, and you might be interested to note that actually the form of this building at the outset was quite different. It was an orthogonal shape, and through discussion with the residents, we felt that we could be more responsive to the townscape, and actually the form has changed, so that when we look at it from a distance, so looking at our sort of townscape views, it presents narrower faces and it meets the sky in a more attractive way. And by doing that, it also emphasises each of the streets as well, because it's really important for us to reinforce the historic street pattern. So it responds to the form, if you like, or the plan form created by Wornington and Portobello, which then again harks back to the original street pattern. You might be also interested to know that we've had a QRP session recently as well, and received positive feedback on the architecture as being developed. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, no, that is very helpful. Yeah, I think it is an important point, because you know you obviously don't want, when there's a building of that size, you don't want it to be very bland, and you want it to add something to the surrounding area, and certainly not detract. But that's very helpful. Both of those points are good to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Councillor O'Connor. Charles, did you have a question there?
Yes, please. I have two questions, if I may. I wanted to know a little bit more about the materials that it is proposed are going to be used on these buildings, and particularly on facing these buildings, and on the sort of hard landscape surfaces. And I also wanted to know about access to these amenity areas, and whether that access is free for everyone on site, or whether there's any charging involved, please.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. I'll let the client come back to you with regards to the access to amenity. In terms of the materials, we're very conscious that we're the third and final phase of the regeneration. So there are already some clues that have been established, and one of those, for example, is the pale brick material. And we wanted to continue that spirit, but because we see this as very much as being an important part of the phase, we really are talking about creating a new start to Portobello Road. We wanted to provide a little bit more of a colour or a blush to the brick materials. Hence, we're showing something which is still quite pale, but it has a pinky hue, for example, in one of our buildings. So they all speak to each other. At the ground floor, very much thinking about, again, tying back to the earlier phases. So we're creating something which is a colour of itself. Soft colours still, but I'm just wondering if I can flip through.
Yeah, I was rather hoping you could show me on a slide.
Shall I do that? Okay. There we go. I think this one's sort of nicely demonstrates that. So in the foreground, we've got phase 2. So we see we've got these.
It hasn't changed for me. Sorry. Is there
some reason?
No, I think Yeah, I think just I'm still looking at the thank you slide at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm hoping it's a lag.
I think perhaps reshare, Victoria, it's not changing.
Polly, did you want to maybe answer the amenity point?
Yeah, shall I cover the
amenity?
Oh, what's that? I'll cover off the amenity point if that's okay, then we'll come back to that while we wait for the presentation. So yes, the access to amenities. Our management plan hasn't been finalised, but our intention is that the any purchasing leaseholders of phases 2B and 3. So phase 2B is the next phase that's due to start on site next year. Any purchasing leaseholders in those phases will automatically have the cost of these amenities included within their service charge. It will be very upfront and transparent in the marketing material that these amenities are part of that charge. And then what we intend to do is have an opt-in solution for all the remaining residents. So that's the affordable residents of all phases, and also the private leaseholders of the earlier phases, so that all remaining residents have the ability to opt in at an additional charge on top of their service charges. And that would be then reimbursed to those private leaseholders that had paid for the cost of it upfront. So it's equalised across the year so that it's an even cost for all residents that access it.
And what sort of charge might it be to those affordable residents?
We're still working up the charging. So we're working on costs now to ensure that it's firstly affordable for those that have it automatically included in their service charge, and then we're just working out the costs for the affordable residents. It looks, I mean, I'd please don't quote me on this because it will change. It looks to be around the £20-25 a month mark, but it could be lower. And what we're looking at is, could we break it down so that perhaps people could access just the element that they're interested in, so not have to access all of those facilities. But if they just wanted to access the gym, for example, that might be £10 rather than the 20. But obviously those figures need to be worked up and need to be worked up as the design develops further. But that's sort of where we are at the moment.
So sort of £20 as a ballpark. I mean, you would expect it to be much more than that.
No, that's certainly what, based on our current designs, that's what we think it should be, around the £20 mark. But it just to mention that the residence room is not included in those. So I don't know if you saw on Victoria's slide, there's a residence room that's very much open to all residents, all phases, all tenures, without the opt-in charge. So it's only the workspace, meeting room, the gym, those sorts of enhanced amenities that would have the additional opt-in charge.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
We were just going to hear the answer on. Sorry, James. We were just going to hear
Charles. Yeah, go ahead.
On surfaces and
yes.
I think Victoria was going to go back in the slides.
I'm hoping, Councillor, that you're able to see the slides change.
Yeah.
So, I've actually changed it back to. I was trying to show you the plan where the residence room was. Apologies. Are you able to see the street elevation again?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So in the foreground is you can just see sort of peeping in is block 6 from phase 2. So the idea of having a continuity at the ground is important, and then we've got this soft brick above, at the base, we're looking at something that's quite robust with a through colour to tie through. And also, does that answer your question, or do you want to continue? We're looking.
Yeah, it does. What I'm quite interested in is where these building materials will be sourced from, and whether they're sort of British or whether they're being shipped in from China or something like that, as a lot of sandstone, for example, I believe is.
Right, okay. I mean, we're not at that stage yet, but I don't imagine anything will be coming from anywhere beyond Europe. It hasn't traditionally.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And brick is actually one of those materials that's very much part of the British culture, and so it's very likely that the brick will be coming from the UK.
Great. Okay, well that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. Wala, did you have a question there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had a question, but it got answered in the middle because I was curious about the composition of the material as opposed to the color and the aesthetics, and I got that. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, in that case, actually, I think let's move on to questions that come from the ward councillors. And actually, Councillor Pat Mason, Pat, you've already put your hand up, so why don't you go first?
Yes,
go ahead.
Can I say first of all that I missed the entire presentation, which of course Councillor filled in, because someone sent us to the wrong to the wrong link. So, but I was around before the 2010 planning application, so I've got plenty in my head. One of the things that's been mentioned, the historical road pattern. Well, of course, that was an issue back in 2010, and we, because the residents pointed it out, they pointed out the issue of speeding traffic on the various roads, particularly, and also the one that we're talking about now, going from Goulburn Road up to Ladbroke Grove. But two of the roads that went back to historical layout, Monroe Mews and Faraday Road, residents have complained about speeding traffic there, and Monroe Mews, the council's had to spend quite a bit of resources, and will have to spend more resources stopping speeding traffic on Monroe Mews. And if anyone looks at the records, that's one issue. The high-rise tower, I've heard the end of the conversation on that. Back in 2010, the tower was going. You can probably answer this. Obviously, it was projected then to be private residents, whether they were leaseholders or renters only. Given that we've got a very, very high need for social rent accommodation, you can tell me whether or not, if you covered it in your presentation, what the mixture of the tenants will be. The other issue was back in 2010 and is now the youth project. I was the chair of the youth project back in up to 2005, I think it was, but it was me that opened up that hut on the end of Wornington Road, and I think I was told by your predecessors who were planning, who were involved in the development, that you would re-provide in some way the youth facilities, and I don't know where that's kind of moved to now, because it was meant to be joined in with some other building. So you can tell me where you think that is. Obviously, there's the issue of all the trees, the 42 trees. I'm sure you've been inundated with people complaining about the 42 trees, and we opposed that back in the 2010 planning application, and we opposed the demolition of Athlone Gardens, in fact, and we opposed the fact that the council was at some point expected to pay for that, or the taxpayer, when at the planning committee back in 2010, Catalyst, or Kensington Housing Trust as it was then, gave a commitment to pay that, pay for that for the developments. There's a story behind that, but you don't want to hear it right now. And then there's the issue of the fire safety proofing the development, because of course the building safety bill, as you know, is going through Parliament, and all developers everywhere are being told to fire safety proof their buildings. In other words, you've got to look at the development as it's being planned now and extrapolate into the future, because if you don't, and I've said this on a dozen briefings, if I've said it on one, is that the buildings you build will soon become could soon become very expensive for the people who either lease them or rent them, because of course, as you know, the Building Safety Bill says, unless it's changed in Parliament, that there'll be a building safety charge added to leaseholders, a separate charge added to leaseholders' costs, and obviously renters will pay as well. So if you don't fireproof, as it were, your buildings according to the new regulations, and there has to be change later on, those leaseholders and tenants will be dumped with the cost, as the people with the cladding problems now have from the old builds. So we opposed the application back then for these reasons and for many other reasons. The fact that there was not enough family dwellings, that they were too small. Some of the residents didn't like the design. They thought the tower, and if the tower looks like the way it is now, it looks like doesn't look very well designed. The piazza back then, I've no idea. You couldn't answer back then who was going to be using it in terms of businesses. We were told that we're going to be cafes and businesses around and so on. So, but no one could actually back then. Maybe you can now. Maybe you did in the presentation. Can explain how it will be used. So this is important, James, because they never listened to anybody back in 2010.
Hold on a sec, Pat. Yeah, sorry, Pat, I apologise if there's a problem with the link, which meant that you joined, were only able to join late. But you've raised a number of points. Actually, a couple were ones that I was thinking about myself. So let's hear a brief response to that, and then I think Sinalari is here as well, and then I'm sure he's going to have also follow-up points. So if we can get a response to the points that Councillor Mason has made, I think that would be helpful, and then we can move on to one of his colleagues.
Okay. So, Councillor Mason, I made a note of your comments, but if I miss anything out, please do prompt me. So hopefully you'll be able to see that I've moved the slide onto routes and connectivity. To your point about traffic, we've undertaken quite a significant round of consultation with the borough to come to this, and I hope this kind of helps satisfy your concerns in that we've really considered how the traffic is going to work with Balby Roundabout, which we understand could be quite tricky. So Wornington Road will be two-way. You will only be able to exit onto Balby. You won't be able to come off Balby Roundabout. And Portobello Road will be one-way traffic, so that it will share its surface with pedestrians and bicycles. And then our grey dots, if you like, they're pedestrian only, so they're crossing across the site in a safe manner. And Portobello Road, which is a shared surface, is also allowing us to have more trees along there, and also the TfL bikes. So that's the routes and connectivity. Whilst we're on this, I could touch on the plaza that you mentioned. So the green space here, we felt it was important to have a bit of a pause or a threshold to the entrance to Portobello Road. Part of the design code, that was actually the 2010 design code, talks about this being a gateway and a landmark and wayfinding. And by pushing the building back, we were able to give some proper breathing space. What we felt was important is providing green space. We know that green space makes us happier, healthier people. And then within that, threading in through the green space, are little places to dwell. And we've undertaken studies, for example, with our wind consultant to make sure that this will be an amenable space to carry out activity. And we've also had studies done by Space Syntax who just test on the viability of movement through spaces, and they suggest that actually this master plan is a good master plan to encourage people to come and move through the spaces. We also know that having pedestrian and cycle heavy streets, which is what we're suggesting for Portobello Road, actually creates the best environment for the success of commercial activity, which was another reason why we wanted to have this. and again helping the public spaces become more active. In terms of fire safety, yes, it's really important, and to that end we have we take this very seriously from first principles when we're designing our layouts and movement through buildings and also the spaces between the buildings. And we also have a fire consultant on board who's been part of the journey, and we're also consulting with Kensington and Chelsea planning team throughout this process as well. So it's something that we're taking on board and being taking very seriously.
Before you move on from that, before you move on from that, you'll have heard from the public inquiry in the first phase that one of the problems that the fire service had when they tried to get into Grenfell Tower is that it was so built up and greened around they couldn't get enough fire engines into the vicinity of the building. And also there were, you may not have this problem here, the access roads were parked out with residents' cars. So I do hope you do take that seriously, because I've been listening every day to the inquiry, and what can actually happen behind in those offices of architects and consultants is absolutely horrific. So I hope you're hands-on with that stuff. You shouldn't trust any of those people who are designing or being consulted on anything, because they are quite often, they're in it for the money. Obviously, they're not. I mean, so safety has to be a big one. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In terms of youth facilities,
for that. No, I think I'm sorry. I'm sure. I would certainly hope you take on board the point that Councillor Mason has just made there. We're beginning to get a bit pressed for time, so I would like to ask Councillor Sina Lari, one of Pat's colleagues. Sina, would you like to ask a question? Just as I say, we've got a bit of time, but not too much. Sina.
Sure. This time last year, when we, as ward councillors, had a briefing with officers, Catalyst had put a plan in for a 15-storey tower, and this was rejected firmly on officer advice. Outline planning permission is already for a 9-storey tower. However, I haven't seen these slides because I had the wrong link for the meeting, so both Pat and I don't know what's on these slides, but it looked from the picture like that's a 12-storey tower that's being proposed at the moment. Would officers still accept that, even though it would clearly go against the SPD? And also, for reference, there is no appetite from our consultations and speaking to residents for any tall building on this site. So would officers still recommend a plan with a 12-storey tower for approval, even though that's higher than what was originally approved in the outline planning permission and goes against our SPD? That's the first question. Second question is on the economic viability of restaurants, shops and cafes in this area, even with the footfall from Portobello Road. So Portobello and Golborne Road, at least in our part of the ward in Golborne, restaurants and shops, even at the best of times, are still struggling, and there's such high turnover and a lot of transients in the tenants, the people and the brands of restaurants, cafes, bars and shops on the road. So how are you convinced that, given the way people are shopping is changing, particularly after COVID, how can we be convinced that it's a viable place to put restaurants, cafes, bars and shops?
Thanks.
Victoria, do you want to take the tower question and then I can come back on the commercial point?
Okay, yeah. So the tall building is actually 15 stories, which we've consulted on locally and also with our BKB, and also presented at the quality review panel, the second of which we had quite recently. The tall building is actually allowing us to create more green space and more public realm, which we felt was important. And also it's allowing us to create more homes, 67 more homes over the parameter plan, which we also felt was important. Sorry, Councillor, does that answer your question? There was...
It does answer it, but I'm still surprised that a 15-storey building is being put through, given the advice you've already received, and by all accounts, consultation with residents has not been approving of this.
We've had mixed feedback from residents. Some have been very much for it, and some understand that it's going to provide more homes and they accept it. And you're correct that not everybody is absolutely for it. We've consulted with the local authority on this, and also there is a feeling that this could be acceptable.
There was a consultation meeting last year in which 0 members of the public actually attended, and that's on record. So I would love to meet these residents who actually are in favour of the tower.
Okay.
We know all about what consultation means. It usually doesn't mean consultation with a significant number of residents. It means 3 people in a room or a few people who went online and filled in correspondence. And sometimes it's people who have got no real interest in the area at all. We know what Catalyst's idea of correspondence of residents.
Sina, I think you've made the major.
I've been at this for 25 years.
Colleagues,
James, so I know what I'm talking about.
No, Pat, I wasn't suggesting you didn't, but you've made the point in a public forum. That's good. We're running out of time, but I would like a couple of members of the public to be able to. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask Amanda Frame to make a comment or a question, and then also I think Natasha, who is from a theatre company, if you're on the line as well, I'd like to give you an opportunity just very briefly to say something. So Amanda, would you like to go next? And just very briefly, and please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, James. And thank you for the meeting. It's been very interesting. I'm going to reverse my order of questions. The very first one is twice the QPR was referred to as being positive. We'd like to see what they said, as opposed to find out later. The fourth is the 15-storey building. We assume that, of course, you're going to comply with the Mayor of London's D11 fire strategy and have sprinklers or at least a misting system in it. But we actually find it architecturally indistinguished. It's not interesting. We do like the fact that there are balconies, so there is some space to go out to, but we don't find it a very interesting building, particularly to be somewhat the pinnacle building of the statement of the development. The next actually goes to the shared space. We are absolutely horrified at the extent of paving and the lack of green space and the actual curbing of great green space as opposed to really usable green space. And that leads us to my last, is has there been any reflection in the designs of these buildings to the COVID effect and the way we actually are going to live in the future and the way we need to have our homes to live in? We need more outside space. We need more open space. We need less hard space. And we find this proposal actually non-reflective of the current life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to those points just very briefly, because I'd like to bring in one more person before we have to round up. Okay.
So in terms of shared space, we see this as being very much part of the whole scheme. And just a reminder that there is a significant green space in terms of Athlone Gardens, and this is actually connecting back to that. I'm trying to be brief here. In terms of the 15 stories, yes, absolutely. Sprinklers have been allowed for and will be included. And in terms of COVID, we do have that conversation internally. And that comes through in terms of the flexible layouts that we're producing for the homes, the private amenity, the idea of doorstep living. So, there's lots on the doorstep to happen. And in terms of the quality review panel, I need to just check what the sharing nature of that is, but I believe that will be part of the officer's report, but I can't swear to that.
Then don't refer to it. You've quoted it several times, but we don't have access to it.
Okay, Amanda, I think we'll have to look into that. Now, unfortunately, I'm afraid we're out of time here. Thank you very much, members of the public who've listened to this evening. If you've got any comments that you would like to reflect back, then please do get in touch via the council's website. And I think in this case, the case officer is going to be Cheryl Savarus. So do get in touch with planning if you want to make a point about anything that you've heard this evening. But now I'm afraid we're going to have to call a point end to this part of the meeting, have a very short break, and then in a few minutes we'll consider the M&S site in the King's Road. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming for this part of the meeting. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the second part of this members' briefing. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the Planning Committee. I'm joined at this briefing by some of my committee colleagues, Councillor Tom Bennett, Councillor Walla Idris and Councillor Charles O'Connor. We're also joined by planning officers who will be following what everyone says, and they are led by Amanda Reid, the Director of Planning and Place. If any of the officers do speak, then I'll introduce them and explain who they are. Now, as I said earlier, when we were talking about Wornington Green, likewise, for this session on M&S and the King's Road, we are not making any decisions this evening at all. We're simply wanting to hear what the latest proposals by the owners and their advisors are, ask questions, clarifications, etc., and see what they have to say. Now, the format of this evening is going to be quite simple. First of all, we ask the owners to make their presentation. I think 10-15 minutes should be good. Then members of the committee can ask questions. That's followed by local councillors, and I think we're going to be now, unfortunately, the Chelsea Society have a meeting this evening, so a couple of my colleagues from Chelsea may come and go between the meetings, but I think I'm sure that we'll be joined by some of the
James, Jim and I have just finished.
Yeah.
Sorry, James. As Josh here, Jim and I have just finished. We're dialing in now. Yep.
Great. Okay. Very good. And then after that, there should be, if we've got a bit of time, there'll be opportunities for members of the public who've registered to also ask questions. If I can just ask everyone, please remind everyone, stay on mute and with your video off unless you're about to speak. And for this evening, can we use the sort of hands up function on Teams, please, if you'd like to ask a question. Okay, so with all of that said, let's go ahead. So perhaps whenever you're ready, please introduce your presentation and everyone who's joining you. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present our proposals to you this evening. So we've got a presentation which is it's around about 15 minutes long. So we'll present that to you, and then, as you say, more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So the scheme is for the redevelopment of 81 to 103 Kings Road, which, as you say, contains the Marks and Spencer store for a new high quality retail, leisure and office development. And I'm Joe Stockton from DP9, we're the planning consultants, and I'm joined this evening by Mohammed Nadar, who's from Kings Road Property Limited. They are the applicants and have owned the site for around about 10 years. Madeline and Katerina from Benoy, who are the lead architects, and Sam Wilson from Cascade Communications. So I'm going to begin by providing a brief overview of the site's context and the pre-application engagement that we have undertaken to date to get to this point. And then Maddie from Benoy will present the proposed development in further detail. So this first slide shows the image on the right shows the site boundary and its position along the Old Kent Road, along Kings Road, which is a short walk from Sloane Square. The site is in the defined Kings Road town centre, and as the image on the left indicates, it's not within a conservation area but is adjacent to the Royal Hospital and Chelsea conservation areas. Next slide, please. Just waiting for the slide to come up. There we go. So this image just helps to further show the site's context, and it shows that the existing building on the site is 4 stories adjacent to the Kings Road, and then steps down to the rear of the site. Next slide, please. So this image on the left more clearly shows the relationship of the existing building to surrounding properties, and the surrounding properties are a mixture of residential and commercial buildings. The residential buildings shaded yellow, and the red arrow on the same image indicates the access road, which is within the site boundary, and it's used by delivery vehicles and provides access to the basement level, which forms part of the site. And it's important to note this access road is shared with the residents of Charles II Place, which is located to the south and to the east of the site. The image on the top right of the page shows the existing building from Kings Road, which, as well as the M&S store, contains 2 smaller retail units on the ground floor and then office space, standalone office space on the upper floor. And the existing building dates back to the 1980s, but its configuration is now outdated in that it contains large, deep floor plates with limited shop frontage, and essentially doesn't meet the needs of modern retail requirements. And that's reflected in the fact that M&S have indicated to the applicant and the owner that they don't wish to renew their lease for the entirety of the store when it ends in 2023, and effectively would only require around half the space that they currently have. And the applicant is in discussions with M&S to fit their modern requirements in the proposed scheme. Next slide, please. So this slide just briefly summarises the consultation that we've undertaken to date to help shape the scheme that's going to be presented to you this evening. So we began discussions with officers in late 2019. We have presented to the Architectural Appraisals Panel and the Quality Review Panel on 2 occasions now, who are supportive of the scheme. And we've also undertaken 2 rounds of public consultation, which began in July of this year. Next slide, please. And this slide just summarises in further detail the public consultation that we've undertaken to date, which has consisted of sending newsletters to over 2,600 addresses, having dedicated virtual meetings with local groups, 2 public webinars, and that has resulted in a good level of feedback. We've received about 119 feedback forms, and on the right-hand side of the page, that briefly summarises the key points that we've received as part of the feedback. One of the key points is a majority of the respondents support the provision of a high quality food retailer as part of the proposed scheme, and we can go into the feedback in more detail if you've got any specific questions. So the scheme that we're presenting this evening has been for extensive engagement, which has resulted in a proposal which makes a significant contribution and positive contribution to the Kings Road, and we're really excited to present it to you this evening.
Thank you, Joe. We'll run through the key principles and project aspirations. The building, we approached the building with the intention of creating something of really high quality design, and also something that ties back to the history of the site. It was a botanical nursery, previously Little's Botanic Nursery, and so we created an element that we call the garden box at the centre of the scheme, which harks back to that history. We wanted to provide a massing that was sensitive to the context and tied into the streetscape appropriately, a scheme that introduces an open courtyard at the ground level at the centre of it, flexible retail space, including space for a food retailer, the provision of high quality office space to support new jobs, and introducing a leisure use into the site, something at basement level to contribute to the Kings Road offer and to reinforce some of the uses above and their interaction with the leisure space, and also a highly sustainable building. So if I talk through the principles, essentially Joe's touched on this previously, but the existing building is a deep floor plates, unsuitable for modern retail. When you have a tenant who wants to downsize, bringing in another use was challenging, if not impossible. So our first step was to introduce an open space into the scheme, something to provide somewhere for people to come to in terms of the courtyard, but also something to link to the lower level and to provide increased frontage and the ability to flexibly introduce a range of different sized units. Enhanced environments, we wanted to give a bit more space on the Kings Road, so we've pushed back the front facade beyond where the existing building sits to give a bit more breathing space on this part of the King's Road. But also we're looking at enhancing the side road environment, the road that's shared with Charles II Place residents, the right-of-way that Joe mentioned earlier. Also looking at terracing the roofscape. So this is in relation to Charles II Place residents at the rear and at the side. It's in response to being sensitive to neighbouring properties, allowing for, you know, appropriate daylight sunlight and not impinging on that sense of enclosure. And then creating a streetscape that is suitable for the street. We looked at, you know, lots of studies of the context and rhythm and grain and how we might step up the roof line to create something interesting on what is a very wide site, actually. And then introducing this local landmark, which we call the garden box, and I'll describe in more detail shortly. So the proposed scheme, I'll show a series of views from the King's Road. As you can see from the key plan at the top, we're looking back towards sort of Sloane Square station end. So you can see the building as it sits in relationship to adjacent buildings. And what we're proposing is a high quality traditional brick facade with some fluting elements, reveals to the windows with botanical imprints, the garden box marking the entry point to the site, but also creating an entry with a setback portion along this corner here. You can see also that we have a facade that fronts the King's Road, but also a top level that is of a different expression, and it's further pushed back in order to create something a bit more sensitive in its surroundings. And obviously, I've mentioned the open space in the scheme. It's really important to us that we create a generous courtyard space, something with seating and landscaping as you enter in off the King's Road, pushed back from the boundary line so that you get that additional breathing space on the King's Road, and somewhere that leads you down into this lower courtyard space. I'll talk in more detail about the enhancements to this road further on, but here you can also see with the roof plan how we're intending to terrace the roofscape in response to residents around this portion of the site here, or behind the site I should say, and the sedum green roofs that we're proposing as a sort of nicer visual outlook than what is there currently. In terms of uses, we are looking at a sort of a series of flexible uses along the lower levels. So to give some context, this is the King's Road here. So you come into the courtyard from the King's Road. We're indicating here that it'll be a combination of shops, restaurants, cafes to these lower levels. I mentioned a leisure use in the basement as well, so a high-end gym, spa, wellness component. At the upper levels, we're looking at office space, sort of 50% traditional and 50% co-working provision of office space. And a series of views here just to describe the environment that we're creating. So this is as you come in right off the King's Road, underneath the garden box element, which is a series of balconies with green edges that protrude from the office floor plates above. It's intended to provide a visual amenity, even though it's accessible by office users above. It's the landmark and it's a visual amenity. And the courtyard, so standing back at the rear of the courtyard, looking back towards the King's Road, and you can see the facade of the garden box behind. In the lower courtyard, which is a sort of food marketplace destination with the potential for a food retailer in this space, and a view to indicate the office. We proposed a hybrid steel and timber CLT deck structural frame as a more sustainable structural approach than concrete, and we're looking at exposed surfaces through here. In terms of the architectural language, I sort of touched on it a little bit before, but as I mentioned, we're looking at a high quality brick facade. There are some fluting features to the facade which tie back to the botanical history in terms of apothecary shelves and shapes and so on. We have the garden box that projects out slightly from the facade as well to sort of create a sort of an announcement to the building. and looking from Markham Street and the alignment of the garden box with Markham Street and that entry point here that's framed, and looking back again the other way. We've proposed a different architectural language to this portion of the building to fit more appropriately with the adjacent building. This was something that was suggested in the quality review panel, and we've adopted that into the scheme. And this talks really about the principles around why we've arrived at this facade on the King's Road and this massing and so on. We looked at a whole range of different buildings in the area and context analysis of the streetscape and solid and void and so on. And what we've proposed is something that steps down at either side of the building in relation to the buildings that sit adjacent, that steps up in the centre to describe the sort of hierarchy of this central element and central feature, and importantly a setback portion of the building above to respond more appropriately in terms of massing and scale. And the key elements of the building in terms of a summary: the fluted brick facade, the setback bronze fins at the top, the garden box projecting balconies with green edges, and the western corner language and a sort of buff brick expression. This is just to show a collection of images around the type of brick that we're looking to select. We're going through quite a rigorous process around selecting the right brick for this project, but it draws influences from buildings in the area. And something to show the finesse and refinement of approach in terms of the detailing. So we've given a different expression to the windows, to the fenestrations as you move up through the building. This is something that you can see in many buildings on the King's Road. And we're looking at elements like botanical imprints to the reveals to, again, tie back to the history of the site as a botanical nursery. Enhanced environments. I've mentioned already the courtyard space from the King's Road, but I'll talk in a bit more detail about this side road. It is a right-of-way for Charles II Place residents. We intend to enhance this environment. Currently, it very much feels like a service road. And what we'd like to do is resurface this, introduce trees, have secondary frontages, provide cycle parking, short stay cycle parking, green the edge of this walkway, this existing walkway, and retain that. We've provided lifts here, and this is a link through to the courtyard space so that you can move through the building that way. We have a disabled bay and a click and collect bay that we're providing, a space here for loading at appropriate times, and it's a series of images here just to describe the environment. So as you enter into the scheme, this is the sort of environment with a sort of profiled soffit at the entry, and the quality of space in the side road with the trees and so on and greening elements. In terms of security and management, we do intend to secure the site after hours. So we would be doing that by placing a security gate here and here. It is important to note that we want this element to be a beautifully designed element that fits with the architectural language that we're creating, and something that when it's folded back along the facade during the day adds to the architecture and the design. So this is not intended to be something that looks like an obstructive barrier, but it is to secure the site after hours. Sustainability. I've mentioned the green roofs. So these are sedum wildflower roofs to encourage biodiversity. As you can see, we're also proposing photovoltaics for on-site renewable energy generation. In terms of heating and cooling requirements, we have eliminated the need for gas heating and are instead using air source heat pumps. There's a provision for a future local heat network connection in the basement. The hybrid steel timber frame structure is important in terms of carbon sequestration and lighter weight structure. Low water use sanitary provisions, monitoring and verifying of energy performance, high quality building fabric, and this is targeting LETI values wherever possible. Mixed mode ventilation systems to allow for natural ventilation when conditions allow. LED lighting, low energy lighting throughout, efficient HVAC systems, more cycle parking provisions to encourage sustainable modes of transport, reducing vehicle parking, and we are targeting BREEAM Excellent and aspiring to BREEAM Outstanding for the officers. In terms of program, we are looking at a submission in January 2021. The M&S lease expires in May 2023, so we'd look to start construction after this point. And in terms of completion, it would be a 2 to 3 year program. And that is it. I'm sure that's the 10-15 minutes up, but no doubt there'll be questions.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that. I think first question from my colleague, Charles O'Connor. Charlie.
Hello, thank you very much, Madeline, for that presentation. I just wanted to ask 2 questions, if I may. One is about the height of the building compared to the other buildings on the King's Road. How does it compare to buildings on the left-hand side or on the south side, and how does it compare to buildings opposite it? And secondly, the windows. I'd like to be talked through those in a little bit more detail. I mean, I broadly like the look of the building, but the windows seem to be big panels of glass with some etching describing a sort of arch on it, and I'd just like to find out whether I've understood that correctly. Thank you.
Sure, of course. So in terms of your first question, I might just share screen again and pull up some slides that might help describe. So hopefully you can see this now, the elevation on the street. Yes. Yeah. So it's worth noting that we've gone through quite a process around heights and massing. There's been some considerable massaging of the height and massing of this scheme. In terms of the existing building, we are actually slightly lower than the existing building when we look at these portions here, but we are slightly higher when we look at these portions here, and obviously there is a stepping approach, as I mentioned, to the central element.
Yeah.
We have set back this upper level so that really does push back from the King's Road, quite considerably to reduce that sense of mass. But this will give you a clear idea of what we're talking about in terms of the immediate context in the buildings adjacent. If I was to look at the wider context, and sorry to flick through at speed, you can see here, where we're sitting in the King's Road. There is obviously a range of heights, as everyone knows, and a range of languages and architectural languages and whatnot. But we are surrounded by some taller buildings as we move along the King's Road. But in terms of the immediate context, I hope that gives you a bit of a better idea. The existing building, you can see, has a sort of profiled roof here. And as I mentioned, we do sit below that at either side of the building where we tie into the adjacent building next door. But as we step up to the central element, we do sit slightly above that. So it's been a process of sort of pushing and pulling the volumes, treating certain elements with a different architectural language, like the top treatment, and looking at a sort of an approach that steps down to the adjacent buildings either side to respond to that more appropriately. I hope that answers your first question.
It does, yes. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
And then the second question, I'm just going to refer to that slide that I shared on the fenestrations. Now, we shared this just to give an idea of the detailing that's going into the facade. We could share many more slides on shop fronts and so on. Essentially, all the windows will be openable. There is the opportunity to open them, and that's why we've designed it for mixed mode, the possibility for natural ventilation when conditions allow. So we have proposed an arched fenestration expression to this floor because we see that with examples on the King's Road. We see it in many examples of buildings where there's a slightly different expression, either in the sash or the opening, or the lintel expression or whatnot. So we've proposed an arched opening here. This isn't a fixed element, it will be openable. There is a reveal here, which we're proposing in a sort of reconstituted stone with an embossed botanical detailing to it. So the bronze reveal around here is obviously fixed. This portion of the window is openable, and the rest of it is fixed. I hope that answers your question on the windows a bit more as well.
That's helpful. Did the quality review panel have anything to say about those windows with the arches sort of inserted within the rectangle?
Yes, they did. This was a development that occurred from their original comments about bringing a bit more delight and variation and playfulness into the facade. They actually liked the idea of having a slightly different window expression to the building. We proposed two options, in essence. One was without this arched expression and just making the openings smaller as you move up through the building, and that sort of element of forced perspective that occurs on many buildings in the King's Road and in London as a result, and one with a bit more playfulness to it, so having this arched element. And this was the option that I think was preferred. So yeah, it's a direct result of the comments that we received from the quality review panel and some of the discussions we've had with RBKC as part of our pre-apps as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Wala, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I see you paid a lot of attention to the height of the building in relation to the buildings on your either side, but I can't see that much attention being paid to the height on the back. So what in relation to the buildings behind you, how much higher is this building?
Sure. So it might be helpful if I share some pages from our appendix now. So if I show you a section through the rear of our site, because I think you're talking about the buildings right at the boundary behind our site.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is a section cutting through, and obviously we have Charles II Place residence behind. This is the existing condition at the moment. So as you can see, you have a building that has a sort of, a setback, I guess, as you come to here. And what we're proposing is actually slightly lower than this at this point, but then this second floor sits slightly further forward, if you can see. So it's not incomparable, but this is the difference between the existing condition and what we're proposing.
Okay, thank you. Can you also talk me about the botanical glass? Is it going to be strictly botanical, or is it going to be? I mean, what is it going? What can you talk me through it, please?
This is something we would have liked to have described more in the presentation, but we were trying to stick to the time limit.
Okay.
This glass box links the office floors above. So it is something that provides a walkway between the floors, but it also is to provide balconies that connect from the floor plate. So if you're working in the office space above, you can come out and you can sit in one of these balconies. They are also lined with plants, and we've selected the plants or I should say our landscape architect has selected the plants to respond to where they're located in the building in terms of direct exposure to light or further down and less exposure to daylight. We wanted to open up the underside of this box and allow people to view up between these balconies, because I think for us, this element we saw as something to talk about the history of the site being a botanical nursery, The inspiration was a Wardian case that transports exotic plants, and we really wanted this to be not only something that provides that quiet green space for office workers, but something that people can see as they arrive, that they can look up at as they enter into the scheme. Something that, although not accessible by the public, provides a kind of visual amenity, and it provides a sort of a connection and a marker back to that botanical history.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Madeline. I just, very quick one, wanted to touch on this, these sort of themes of bringing in the history of the site as a botanical nursery and the sort of etching on the glass, and I do like it. I think it certainly adds character to the site. It is quite subtle though, and obviously our residents in Chelsea are a very perceptive bunch generally, but the subtlety might still be lost on some of them. Are there any other elements of the facade where you've considered sort of refraining or demonstrating this sort of botanical nursery theme?
Yes, so it's a good thing to bring up, and we had a meeting with the Chelsea Society earlier today, actually, where we discussed some of these things as well. I think we see an opportunity, perhaps in certain parts of the facade, for example, this flank wall here, that you might something interesting in terms of a patterning, and so on to the building. We would like to bring in something that's perhaps a little more direct, even,
yeah, and
make more of it with the facade. So it's definitely something that we're still looking at, still developing, but keen to incorporate.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Final question from me, actually. Do you mind if we go back to the King's Road for elevation image? Yeah, here we go. Okay, thank you. Just to say, I think particularly things like the floor plans and the overall massing of the building, I completely understand where you're coming from on all of that. I'm just looking at that facade, and I'm just wondering, has anyone commented that there seem to be rather a lot of levels here when we look at that? Now, I immediately should say, I realise nobody actually really in the street looks at a building as though, like here, we're looking at an elevation drawing. I realise that, but we've got a lot of sort of steps up and down, and I think originally you had a drawing of Dutch gables, which obviously is actually quite a lot of buildings that have that style. I'm just wondering, has anyone? I mean, I can see that the highest level, having that set back from the front, is probably it's something that's kind of necessary, and I completely understand. But we got, what have we, 1, 2, 3 with the top of the glass. Then we go down, and then actually no, we've only got 3 levels, but it's. Has anyone commented on that previously? I don't know. Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, do you mean in terms of actually the stepping up and down in terms of a sort of varied roof line? Is that?
Yes, it just sort of looks slightly as though there's kind of, and obviously on the right hand of the image, that level, of course, on the right hand side of the building, of course, is stepped back, isn't it, from the front roof line? So sorry, the pavement line. So in effect, there's another level as well there. Yeah. I don't know. Well, maybe a case of what do I know, but has there been thought about that? What's the thinking there?
Yes, there has actually. I wasn't sure if you meant the number of floors, but I understand you mean the levels, the setbacks, the push and the pull, and there's quite a lot going on.
Yeah.
I would say that's been the nature of almost every discussion we've had as part of the pre-application meetings. Definitely been discussed in the QRP, so it is absolutely something that we've discussed. And you know, it's changed quite a bit as we've moved through the process. We'll just pull up this slide again, because actually when we started this, we thought that you know, you take a very wide block, and this is one of the wider sites on the King's Road. And the first thing that we wanted to do was give it some vertical expression, but at the same time remain sensitive to height and context. So it started with the intention to drop down at the sides to tie into the adjacent buildings, and then we looked at this push and pull effect of the top floor, pushed back from the front of the King's Road. We actually initially had a roof profile that stepped up and down a bit more between these bays, and that was to give a sort of more organic roof line. But what we found and what the feedback was from QRPs and from pre-apps was that actually looking to achieve a more symmetrical facade for this portion of the building, and obviously this is stepped back for that reason, to maintain the symmetry, and to have a sort of hierarchy of meeting this central feature was considered to be more successful than the more organic roof line. We also had elements that sat in different points in the sort of push and pull space, and we've kind of refined that quite a bit. We aligned that whole level, apart from obviously this portion here. So we have actually gone through quite a lengthy process of looking at where the height occurs, aligning the elements that are stepped back, and trying to simplify that in a way. So it is something that we have.
All right. So that's helpful. Thank you very much. I think what we should do now is we should move on to invite comments from local councillors. And I think Councillor Randall, Josh, I think you'd like to ask the next question. So Josh, when you're ready.
Thank you, James. Yes. Hello, Madeline. I'm Josh. I'm the councillor for Stanley Ward, which is the ward directly opposite the site. So basically how you're looking at it now from the other side of the road. One of the concerns I have, which I think probably both James, Tom, well, actually all the members of the planning committee have raised, is the massing and the density. And my worry is the sense of enclosure. So which I don't think necessarily your plans currently reflect. That part of the King's Road is extremely narrow. It's basically only half a lane wide on each side, especially from the where Markham Street is, which is obviously directly opposite your building. And I'm just worried that just the height of it and the mass of it is going to be quite intense, especially around that particular part of Chelsea. Of course, conscious it's a shopping. Let me put it a different way. It's a residential district with shopping elements in it, and I think that's what we think and we need to understand. So my first question is, what was the initial views of Markham Street Resident Association, Justice Society, etc., on your initial plans?
Sure. So sorry, I'm hearing a bit of feedback. So in terms of the Chelsea Society, I might speak about the feedback we received from them, since the latest meeting we had was just this morning. I think they have said that they find the scheme quite aspirational in terms of tying back to the history and what it's trying to do. In terms of specifically, I assume you're asking about in terms of scale and massing, obviously. Joe, I don't know if, or Sam, I know you're on the line. I don't know if you, I would rather not put words in people's mouths. So I don't know if either of you wanted to jump in and comment at this point on the feedback that we've had from various groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the point in terms of the general question on the massing, I think it might be helpful to actually go to one of the visuals of the scheme from the King's Road rather than looking at a flat elevation. It doesn't obviously truly reflect how you experience the building. But what I would say is that I think a couple of points is that the proposed building is actually set back from the edge of the site, which helps to provide some relief. And then also, obviously, as this visual shows and as Maddie's explained, the top story is clearly set back further from the edge of the main facade. So I think the combination of those two moves very much help to provide relief from the King's Road, and I think both of those moves help to make the massing sit comfortably within the King's Road, and that's a view that's shared by the quality review panel. I think in terms of the specific feedback from the local groups, I think that there was a comment about whether certainly the Chelsea Society, whether the sort of the proposed height does sit comfortably within the King's Road, and I think our response is what I've just explained, that the building line is set back and then the top levels are set back further, and I think the combination of the two, we feel that the sort of massing and height sits comfortably in the context. So,
Thank you. No. Sorry, Madeline. No, I was just going to say, yeah, I think maybe from the plans, just from my personal view, representing my residents as I know they are, I think the sense of enclosure, I think, is going to be a major debate that will come when the planning application is put in. So I'll just flag that. On my second point is, I know there's no housing, either social or private. Is there any reason for that?
No residential as part of the scheme.
Yes, that's right. No residential.
Yeah. It's something that actually, when we started the project, we looked at feasibilities of a whole host of different uses, and this sort of combination of uses was seen as the most viable, successful for the site and for the scheme, and so we didn't pursue a residential development on this site for that reason. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I'm conscious of course, we've got housing targets we must meet, and always flagging those at a potential development site such as this.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I guess, is, we do have, the client has a tenant on the site already in the form of M&S as well as others, and the intention was to sort of take a site and a building that probably wasn't fit for future use in that respect, but to maintain the tenant and to adapt it so that it was suitable for modern retail and it would be sort of future proofed and viable for other uses and so on.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fine. I just thought I'll Chairman, with your leave, I will flag that. I think perhaps to mitigate the sense of enclosure, the daylight sunlight issue, the massing issue. Residents in the past have been, as we experienced from the Curzon site, which is just the site a few doors up from where this development is, that has been mitigated through residential, either social residential or private residential, more so on the social side, where residents accept that for, as a means of accepting the building as a whole rather than just 100% business related. But I'll leave that there, but I just thought I'd flag that.
Yeah, thank you. I will say, just in terms of daylight, sunlight, sense of enclosure and so on, this is partly why we've taken the approach of terracing down the volumes of the building so considerably at the rear, because I think we recognise, obviously, that the residential that sits around, this portion of the site is quite close to the building, and so we've taken steps to obviously terrace this down and really respond to that. And we obviously are still working with daylight sunlight consultants to retest the building and so on, but original results that we received on this testing were quite positive and I think well accepted. So We're definitely conscious of it, and we're definitely, you know, doing everything in terms of this design to address that positively.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And I think it's important to point out that Josh's fellow local councillors in Stanley and Royal Hospital, I know, will be following this very closely. I think many of them are probably at a Chelsea Society meeting, which is clashing with us, unfortunately. But I'd like to move on now to, I'd like to ask Mrs. Gledhill if you're able to join us. Yes. I think you would like to ask a question, is that right?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much, Chairman. Where have your discussions got to with M&S, and are you sure that they're going to remain on the site? Question one, the other point that was raised before, the current site provides parking for users of M&S, and I understand there are not going to be any significant parking facilities envisaged in the site as proposed. What is the position on that?
Sure. So in terms of M&S discussions, we're still speaking to them about location on site and meeting their needs and so on. And obviously, as I mentioned, they're looking to downsize, so they have a changing set of needs, but that's still ongoing. In terms of parking, absolutely, there is currently a basement level of parking, and we aren't proposing to retain that. We are providing one disabled bay and one click and collect bay. That's in response to the planning policy around parking, and obviously this site with a bus stop out the front and frequent sort of buses coming past, and for other various reasons, it has quite a high public transport rating, and so as a result, the planning policy is for a car-free scheme, but we are providing a disabled bay and a click and collect bay for the purposes of being able to, you know, pick up groceries and so on easily in that respect. Yeah, that's the nature of the proposal in terms of what we're providing in terms of parking.
Chairman, may I be allowed to follow up?
Yes, yes, of course. Go ahead, please.
This, of course, means that there is going to be increased pressure on residents parking in the adjoining streets. And I think it is important to point out that this is a major concern to residents in these streets. The borough operates a borough-wide residents parking policy, and therefore anybody from around the borough can come and park in any of the residence space in our streets, and the pressure on the base is usually very significantly. It's obviously not at the moment with COVID and everything else. And it is an issue that does concern residents. And I think I just want to flag this up because it is a matter of some concern.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for raising that. I think probably quite a lot of people agree with what you say there. I need to come back because I missed Councillor Jem Kamali, who represents Royal Hospital. He has a question. So, Jem, do you want to put that now?
Thank you, James. In fact, I think Gisela has taken the words out of my mouth.
Right. Okay.
I was going to raise firstly the issue of parking and also the fact that, of course, you know, whilst residents can walk and take the bus to the shop, one of the benefits of the M&S at the moment is that for heavy shopping, one can go straight to the car park and drive it home. And I do appreciate that it's one disabled and one click and collect, but I would urge a little bit more inclusion for car spaces. And I do also wonder which policy prohibits it. I do understand we have car-free policies on residential properties, but I didn't know we were encouraging it for commercial uses. So I would like that clarified. And then from a sort of a design, and I appreciate it's entirely subjective, but from the front side, and I'm sort of echoing Councillor Rendell's comments here, I do wonder with the Dutch gable that was mentioned earlier, and in effect what the building has at the moment, albeit a rather rudimentary version, I was just wondering whether or not any consideration had been given to not being entirely rectangular in design. At any point, if you were to slice through the building, I sense you would come across a rectangle. And I was wondering if anything more around some curvature or perhaps some sloping or a mansard with an angle rather than a vertical line could be incorporated rather than simply straight line vertical elements. I think that would be helpful, although I do appreciate I'm just one voice and you can't design by committee. So those would be my comments, Madeline. Thank you for the presentation. I think you've heard my voice multiple times now on this issue, but anyway, thank you.
Joe, did you?
Thanks for the question. I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Madeline, I can clarify the car parking point, and then if you want to come back on the design question, I think in terms of the car parking point, as Madeline said, the scheme is car free, and that does fully accord with the relevant development plan policies in the London plan and also the RBKC local plan for commercial schemes, because the site is in a highly accessible town centre location. The policy requirement is for car-free schemes. I would also note it does fit with the council's strategic objectives, which is to reduce congestion along the King's Road and improve air quality. I think another point to note is a car-free scheme. What it does allow us to do is it maximises the benefits in terms of at the lower floors, in terms of providing open space at the ground and lower levels, and also maximises the sort of quantum of flexible uses on the ground and lower levels, which, again, both fully accord with relevant policies to increase the vibrancy of town centre locations, particularly King's Road. We do, however, recognise that walking and cycling as an alternative means of transport may not be for everyone, particularly if the intention is to do a larger shop. So the scheme does incorporate the click and collect bay, which would be operated by a food retailer, and you would be able to sort of book a designated slot to pick up larger shopping. And I will also say there's obviously an increase generally in food retailers offering home delivery services. So that would be another option for those people that wanted to get larger shops, but weren't able to do that by visiting the store. And clearly, obviously, the site does, the proposed scheme does provide increased cycle spaces as well for those shorter trips.
Just in terms of the architecture, I might just I just thought, although I know this isn't directly addressing your comment around a mansard or a gable or something that isn't perhaps, sort of rectilinear, let's say, we do incorporate a sort of fluting to the facade, and that is a means to sort of soften the facade, I think, but it's also and it's to bring in a sort of element of playfulness and refinement in terms of a curved brick facade. So I know it doesn't directly respond to your comment on a mansard, something sloping, something that isn't straight up and down, but that's our way of bringing in a sort of a curvature, a sort of playfulness and a refinement to the facade.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Now, finally, and I think this will have to be the last question, I think Mr. Peter Dykes, are you able to join us? I think you would like to put a question as well. Is that right?
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. No, sorry, I'm sitting here with David as a resident of 12 Markham Square.
Right.
I think all I'd say is it's great. Having lived in the area all my life, it's great something is happening to that site. And I think the work that's gone in is fantastic. And I think the more that one can have of attractive retail and office space and make the King's Road more of the destination location that it was is fantastic. My only concern is possibly on massing, but I think, like all these things, as somebody said earlier, you're right. You look at something straight on now, and it seems possibly larger than it would when you're on street level, when it's set back. So aside from that, I think I can't speak for everyone in Markham Square, but as a resident, it's just really, really encouraging to have something that's taken shape like this on a site, anchored on one side by Waitrose that Cadogan are doing, and anchored on the other by what Crosstree are doing at the King's Walk Shopping Centre. It's a great period. And I think these are probably three landmark buildings that the King's Road valuably needs, having sorted out the top end near Sloane Square.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed for that comment. That's helpful. Well, everyone, I think our time is pretty well up. So thank you all for contributing, and thank you very much to everyone for the presentation. That was very helpful. Have a much better idea of what this scheme might be. So with that, I would say thank you and a very good evening. Thank you very much.